The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. Good morning, everyone. It is March the 12th, 2026. We're live here, Financial Rebellion on CHD TV. We do not have Catherine this week, but we do have Carolyn Betts, as always. And we're so delighted to have Margaret Byfield here with us this morning. Good morning, Margaret.
Good morning. It's great to be with you.
Can you remind everyone who you are, what you do?
Sure. So I run American Stewards of Liberty. We're a property rights organization, and we fight. I guess probably the easiest way to explain what we do is we're fighting the environmental regulations and all of the entities that are trying to lock up our land and keep people from being able to produce from their land and use it the way that they want. So property rights that's our goal, that's our mission. And as we've talked many times before, it's absolutely fundamental to our liberty. We either have the right to own property or we are property. And so that's what we fight for.
Really important work. Thank you so much for being here and all that you do. So, well, Lou's going to bring up the first headline, I think is what we're going to go to. And it is, was Jeffrey Epstein the father of programmable money? Carolyn, Margaret, talk us through that.
Yes, with all of the revelations about sexual trafficking and things like that having to do with Jeffrey Epstein, a lot of the news is not focused on the things that are revealed in the Epstein files that have been released that indicate that he was a fixer and he was involved in devising and facilitating all sorts of things that we're now fighting, including programmable money. And so this is an article on the Solari report about programmable money, and we also have a legislative briefing that we do a legislative briefing for state legislators and other people who are interested once a month. And the one that we did for this month was on programmable money. And there's so much information out there and a lot of things to educate people on, legislators in particular, with everything that's happening now, that we decided to do a part 2 for April. So we'll be doing a part 2 for that, and that's very educational. And there just isn't. Catherine testified yesterday in the Tennessee legislature, and they did not pass. I think it was the House. They did not pass or forward on to the full committee or whatever the status was. They didn't go with it. And a lot of the reason is that they don't understand what programmable money is and what the dangers are. And the banking lobby is very much wants to do stablecoin and what they envision is going to be in the Clarity Act. And they're fighting against the fintech companies that are going to be issuers of these forms of crypto. And so they don't want to have any limits, but they are not seeing the really deep ramifications. And so the important thing is that we educate our legislators, or, as individuals who have legislative representatives, let them know it's an important enough issue for them to really understand. Because if all they do is take what the bankers say as the risk, they're not focusing on everything, and not the bankers won't have an incentive to really understand, because this is not good for the bankers either. I mean, for the fintech or the financial people doing finance that are not regulated as banks, and so that's their competition. So the more business the fintechs get, there's as Catherine would say, a giant sucking sound from the deposits that the banks have some control over in the banking system, going into, for example, treasuries with stable coins. So anyway, that's something that we invite people to look at. And what's our next item?
Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee meeting known as VRBAC. That is happening right now. So you can go and watch that or finish watching Financial Rebellion. And that VRBAC meeting will be in our events page forever and ever and ever. And we are so excited that Carl Jablowski, our senior science researcher, is live blogging that right now. So you have the option to go over there and watch that live, and then watch Financial Rebellion later, or vice versa. Both will be on our site, so no panics.
Yes, and it's very educational. I watched the ACIP meetings with Meryl live blogging, and it was really interesting to see her comments.
Yeah.
Then we have some action alerts. I'm not going to spend a long time on this, but the Farm Bill, as it exists now, has a liability shield in it, and we really need to fight that. We had a guest a couple months ago talking about the liability shields, and she says it's an existential event to allow the proliferation of herbicides and pesticides that would happen with the liability shield, because basically if you have a liability shield, you're injured and you can't get any remedy, and that means there's no incentive to make them safer or to work without them.
Right, and as we talked before, it's just like the vaccines, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, exactly the same thing. And the worst thing about this is that it just gets worse and worse and worse. They add more, because they can just do what they like. It's a ticket to do what they like. Look at the vaccine schedule; it's exactly the same. Started with a few, add more, because who cares? No one's going to sue us. We can just do whatever we like.
Yeah, and we probably mentioned that Trump issued an executive order that declares that glyphosate is a national security issue, and we need to facilitate the production of glyphosate. And if you are addicted to pesticides and herbicides, I guess it's better to have control over the ingredients in this country as opposed to elsewhere. But what this really highlights the necessity, the really urgency that we need to be developing regenerative farming methods that wean us away from this. And the current applicability of the issue of farming is that with the shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz, some significant, I want to say 20%, but I could be wrong, of the ingredients for making fertilizer are shipped through the Gulf of Hormuz. So when it's shut down, one can expect a shortage of fertilizer all over the world. So this isn't even just a national issue, it's an international issue.
Does Margaret want to comment on that, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. And the key is our agriculture community is not set up yet to operate without all of these additions. We can think about the Sri Lanka story where they went organic, overnight and went into extreme poverty and couldn't feed their nation. So we need to, as Carolyn said, we've got to get weaned off of these and get back to producing good soils and good food, good healthy food, very nutritious food. But it's not going to happen all at once. We've got to put the programs in place that start getting us to the point that we get back to really good solid food system.
Right.
Yeah, because ultimately it's just poisoning us. It's like people saying, "Oh, we can't just get rid of the vaccines, because if we get rid of the vaccines, measles and everything, well, that's going to come back." I say just stop. We're poisoning ourselves in every single way, from the air, from the ground, injecting ourselves. It's just we have to let nature correct itself, and if we give it a chance, it will.
Right. I mean, we did it before. I mean, everybody's saying, "Oh, well, we can't get along without this." It's like, well, we were a country and people who were healthy and had good food before. And, the population hasn't just skyrocketed to making it incredibly more difficult. We throw food away all the time. So, okay, the next action alert is, don't we have another action alert? Yeah.
I thought we were going to the data center story.
Yeah, we're just pointing out that their action items have to do with our telling you, if you live in this state, be awake and consider contacting your legislator. And there in Tennessee, there's a ban on a pending bill to ban water fluoridation. And we also have pesticide liability shield up for consideration in Kentucky.
Okay, good. Take action alerts. Let's
Okay.
go on to the data center story.
Okay, yes. This is something we came across in at Solari. For our subscribers, we have something called Solari Connect, and we have different groups, some of them based on location, of subscribers who have their own sort of internal social media. And this was posted on one of the Solari Connects. And so we talked about it in our Ask Catherine, where people ask questions and provide us links. And on the face of it, it looks like, oh my God, this is great, because we don't like the encroachment on our property rights, which we will talk about in a minute, from data centers. And but guess what? The way this farmer thought that he was able to, he was selling his property, which is very valuable. He had Meta, or one of the big IT companies that wanted to buy for a data center, wanted to buy his land for a very high price, and he instead wanted to sell it for a lower price, but wanted to protect it from somebody just flipping it, and then selling it to a data center and, getting the difference. And the way he did this was with a conservation easement. I'm going to ask Margaret to tell us why that's not a great solution.
Well, so you have to remember, a conservation easement only constricts the landowner. So they're the only ones that have to, who aren't allowed to build more houses or entities or structures on their land. And what people forget about conservation easements is that they're often sold as, hey, this is going to preserve your land forever. You can die knowing that there will never be a data center on your particular property, right? That's kind of the dream that's sold. But what you have to realize is any piece of land in America can be condemned for a public purpose. So this land, even with a conservation easement, can be condemned for a public purpose by any entity that has that authority. Right now in Texas, we're fighting these huge 765 transmission lines, which are completely unnecessary for our grid and will make it more unreliable. And, so landowners are going through this right now in Texas, where they are fighting a transmission company that can literally condemn their land for any purpose. And I've read environmental impact statements on different issues where the developer says they prefer to go through land with conservation easements on it because it's reduced in value, it's easier to condemn. So, I think these conservation easements, again, they get sold as the lifeboat to save property. And when you really look at them, they actually are doing exactly the opposite. And the landowner is going to have no control over that.
Yes. Now, in the short term, presumably, this conservation easement would prevent somebody else, the person who buys the property, from flipping it right away and, using it for a data center at that particular owner's discretion. But that doesn't prevent Meta or Amazon or a big data hoarder that wants to build a data center from getting in basically collusion with the local legislators, the local governance people, because that's what has to happen in order to have eminent domain. When she talks about condemnation, that is what's also known as eminent domain. And in the beginning, eminent domain was really only used for things clearly like highways. But in my local area, there's a fancy schmancy shopping area that's in a less desirable neighborhood adjacent to the fancy schmancy area. And there were some modest homes that people lived in, and they used the power of condemnation to allow the building of a shopping center. And people lost their homes, and who knows whether they got a fair price for it. But, and that case actually went to the United States Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court has expanded, and other courts have expanded the ability of private parties to basically grab property from other private property owners through the government.
Can I interject one more point on this while
Absolutely.
while we're landing here? So the other thing that you have to remember about conservation easements is the activity is frozen on that land. So now the producer can't do any more than what they're already doing. And that often means they can't keep up with technology. So what you have happening is if it's a piece of property that people are making their living off of, they are unable to keep up with technology, and they are unable to produce more from their land. And so eventually they get driven out of business because they cannot make their land productive enough to support them. And so they end up having to sell. But the only people that want to buy it at that point is a land trust. And that does happen. So it's the land trust is the only one that's going to get any value of it, be able to do anything with that property that already owns the conservation easement. So as an attorney, you know how this works. Once a conservation easement is an easement, and you can't hold an easement against yourself. So once the land trust that holds the easement buys the underlying land, that conservation easement goes away, and they can do whatever they want with that land. So that's another thing out in the future. And this whole promise that conservation easements are the savior and going to keep your land forever untouched is an empty promise.
Yes, and one thing that people who aren't as sophisticated, and this is not to put them down, regular people, you hear the names of these entities that sound like they're doing charitable, wonderful purposes for the betterment of society. And the fact is that there often are underlying reasons that they are going to be making a lot of money to the detriment of the people that think that they're getting some sort of save the world result from supporting these entities. So just consider that. Okay, well, this leads us into our term of the day, which is property rights. And you may think you know what property rights are, but they really encompass much more on a legal basis than you might imagine. And in order to know when your rights are being violated and those of people you want to support, you need to understand the whole bunch of rights that come with owning. We're talking about real estate property rights. Of course, they're chattels, and those are, personal property is your car or your coffee cup. But real estate are the type of property that we're talking about here. And so property rights are a bundle. It's a bundle concept. You have when you have real estate, there is a right to possess, which can be given away even though you have title to the property. If you lease the property, you're giving away some of the property rights by contract over a limited period of time and subject to the lease. The right to use, which is what you have in a leasehold. When you lease property, you have the right to use it according to the terms of the lease. And there is a right to exclude others. And actually, when you are the owner of a leasehold interest, you have a limited right to exclude the title owner of the property, subject to the terms of the lease. So the landlord has to give notice before coming onto the property. There's a right to transfer, of course, sell, lease, give the property away. And you have a right to grant an easement, right to encumber, which would be an easement, a mortgage, an HOA. When you buy property that's subject to an HOA, that property is encumbered, and it would have been encumbered originally by the original transferees of the property when the whole legal structure of the HOA is set up. And so when that property is transferred, the encumbrance of the HOA, the things that they're allowed to say you can do and what you can't do, and the right to charge you for maintaining according to the terms of the HOA. You're subject to that, and you can't get rid of that. An individual can't get rid of that. You can, through action through the HOA, in which the property owners have some rights, can do that. But generally, the developer of the property is in a position to manage the HOA. So you do have limited rights. But now, those are the things that we're generally aware of, but there are also limitations on property rights that are imposed by government. You have police power. We have constitutional limits on how much the government can come onto your land without a warrant or probable cause, and that's limited to some extent by emergencies. But that is the police power is a limitation on your property rights. Although I will point out, of interest to gun owners, is the whole concept of your home is your castle. You are allowed to protect, and the law differs from one state to another, but you do have a right to exclude others by force if they are threatening your property. And as I said, that depends on what the law is for a given state in a given area. But then there's a right of eminent domain that limits. We talked a little bit about that already. The government can condemn, and that is generally not your federal government. There are federal government eminent domain actions. I'm assuming that would be for a highway, for example, an interstate highway. That would involve the federal government. But the one I was describing about the shopping center, federal government didn't have anything to do with that. That has to do with the state or the local. Usually it would be the county in that case. And then the power of taxation. And with that comes the power to levy assessments. Because I live in a township in Ohio where there was a case, there was groundwater contamination, and there was a case that forces the utility to build new lines in order to protect our water. Well, water that comes onto my property, there's an assessment for that purpose, and my bills, my water bills, I have a sewage bill that's double the amount of water that I'm charged for by formula, and that money is allocated toward paying off, presumably paying off bonds that are used to construct the pipes that they're building for sewage purposes. So when you go to buy a piece of property, even for residential purposes, there are all sorts of things like that assessment that you might not know about that affect the value of your land. It may not be an indirect effect, but it's part of the bundle of things that are considered in connection with valuation of the land. And we're going to be talking to Stephanie Cross next month about some of those things that can, governmental actions and other climate change and all sorts of things that are happening in the environment now that affect the value of your land. I mean, whether you can insure your property. If you can't insure your property, which is the case in some areas that have been hit by hurricanes, and in California, I know that at least one of the major property insurers has backed out. Well, if you can't insure your land, how much can you sell it for? So that the actions of private parties, those are private, insurance companies are private, a little bit regulated by the insurance commission, but for the most part, they're free to do what they want, and they can pull out of insuring somewhere. So anyway, we'll be talking to Stephanie Cross about that in a few weeks. Then there are different types of ownership interests. What you think, if you own a house and you're not in an area that has mining and oil, you probably have what's called a fee simple interest. That's a straightforward title. that it can be burdened by mortgage, all sorts of things, but you have a deed and it's not subject to other types of restrictions. It's a fee, simple interest, and ordinarily when you get a title policy, you will probably have a guarantee that if there's any fee, any interest that burdens your fee simple interest that isn't disclosed when you buy the property, you have an action against the title insurer. There is such a thing as a life estate. Many people aren't particularly aware of life estates, but you can convey, if you have a reverse mortgage, there's probably a life estate type of mortgage. But a life estate, it means that you have the property for your use, subject to any conditions in the title, until you die, and then the interest in your interest in the property reverts to whoever is named in probably on the deed to get the interest after you die. So then there's a leasehold interest that it's called a leasehold interest. What you have when you are when you rent property or lease property. And then there are future interests. The person who gets your property after a life estate has a future interest currently. And so that person has a stake in what happens to the property because the value of that property when you die, the value is affected even after you die. So the future interest holder, and there are lots of, when you take property in law school, you see cases where different holders of different interests are suing each other because what the person in current control of the property can do can affect the interests of other people. And that definitely comes up in the context of mining and oil and gas interests, which are the primary types of interests. How much of the property do you own? Do you own the rights that are underneath the surface? Well, people in Kentucky and some of the other areas, Pennsylvania, there are a lot where there are oil and Texas, of course, mining and oil interests. They don't care, for the most part, they don't care what's in your house. Although if in some states and under certain conditions, the owner of this subsurface rights has the superior right. And that means that they can tear down your house under certain circumstances if that's what they need to get to their right. So it definitely decreases the value of your property, even if you primarily want it to live in a house, if you don't own the subsurface rights. And there are rights above your property, and that's something that people in New York would be very familiar with, because the right to build up high is a separate right, and it's not in the improvement. Anything that is built on a property is called an improvement that's attached to the property, and anything above that is a right in the air, and that is sometimes limited. So then there are rights shared with others, and most people are aware of co-ownership interests, which would be tenancy in common or tenancy with rights of survivorship. Then easements that we talked about, and then there are covenants and deed restrictions, and that is where the conservation easements would come in. So that pretty much covers property rights. Margaret, I want to hear what you have to say about property rights, and we will go into your presentation of the current matters of interest affecting your property rights.
Yeah, well, thank you, Carolyn. That was a really good background. I mean, I felt like I was in a good short course on law school on property rights. That was very good. Thank you. I like to kind of simplify what property is. I think one of the most fundamental elements of property is control. So if you don't control that property, you really don't own it. And so that's where we like to kind of start in how we look at property rights and all the issues that impact those property rights. And so I think what I want to do this morning with this audience is just kind of walk through a few things that we've had some pretty good success with the new administration. We've had 1 year of the Trump administration, and they have done some incredible things to start rolling back some of the big agendas we fought and that we've talked about on this program several times, the 30 by 30 agenda, the natural asset company agenda. So we're making some good headway on those fronts. However, we are also, there's an awful lot to unravel, and there's a lot happening that is really eroding property rights in America. And so I want to cover a few of those things, and then also maybe we can leave today with a short list of the things landowners can do and a short list of things that consumers can do to improve, protect, strengthen our property rights, which is, as we said in the opening, is absolutely fundamental to our liberty. We either own the property or we are property, or we either have the right to own property or we are property. And as we're in our 250th year birthday celebration for this great nation, the thing that I like to remind people of is what makes our nation so unique. We all probably have an answer to that, how we kind of personally digest that. But I will tell you that the key fundamental element that distinguishes our nation from any other is that we are the only nation that was founded under the ideal that the people would own the land, not kings and not governments. And the reason for that was to make sure that the people would always be able to control their government. That's essential to America. And that's really what creates our distinction, our uniqueness as a nation. And that's also what is being so eroded today in America. We're at a place where I think the number still is around 40% of the land in America is now owned by government, local, state, and federal. That's huge and completely opposite of the agenda that our founders had, which was that the people would always own the land, therefore the people would always be able to control their government. And we're seeing it. You know, all these issues you guys talk about all the time on this program, we're seeing that people have less and less control over our government. And that directly relates to whether or not we own the land, which is the beginning of all creation of all wealth and resources. And so it's key. Whoever owns those natural resources controls the nation. And that was always supposed to be in the hands of the people. So that's really what we work on to try and reverse that. So let me just jump into a few things. Two big agendas that we fought during the Biden administration, the 30 by 30 agenda, which was to permanently protect 30% of our lands and oceans in America by 2030. It's actually an international agenda. They're trying to do this internationally as well. It's all tied into the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, the bigger agenda. But that is something that the Biden administration launched, I think, on day 6 in their administration, and we jumped on very quickly and pushed that back the best that we could during his administration. But that is one of the things that on day 1 of the new Trump administration, Trump rescinded that agenda, which is fantastic. But the problem is they spent 4 years entrenching a lot of the policies that implement that are still hard baked into agency decision making. And so that's something that all of the departments are having to kind of dig out internally. The other thing that the Trump administration rescinded was the natural asset accounts, capital accounts, which is where the Biden administration was planning to add to the federal balance sheet a new line item, which was going to quantify and monetize the value of these ecosystem values that they are basically created out of whole cloth, and which are things like carbon, pollination, photosynthesis, things that aren't truly a property right, as Carolyn, as you just set forth, because in simplistic terms, these are things that you can't contain or exclude other people from. You can't exclude anybody from breathing air that comes off of your ground or you think comes off of your land. Same with pollination, all of these things. But by creating this as another right, it's another way for them to claim ownership of a portion of your property and ultimately work into the control of your property. So that was rescinded on day one as well, that national strategy to do that. But I do like to remind people that contained in that strategy was they were also planning to add to the federal balance sheet as collateral, as a U.S. asset, all the value of private land in America. And they had that at $3 trillion. And in their documentation, that is one of the things that they said they would need to do is add the value of private property to the federal balance sheet as collateral, which then helps them increase the national debt. I gave a talk on this. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Yeah, I have a question though about that $3 trillion. I am quite sure that all of the property in the country is worth more than $3 trillion.
Sorry. 32. It's 32. Sorry, I misspoke.
Oh, so it's the entire value. I thought maybe if it was $3 trillion, that maybe it was just the natural, the pollen and all of that, and not actually the value of the land. They actually put the value of the sale, the fair market value, the entire fair market value of the land on the federal balance sheet.
Well, what their plan was, they were going to create the natural capital account. So that was the line item to go on the balance sheet. And then they came out with, 18 months later, they came out with their pilot test accounts. And that's where they explained what would be going into that category. And so they broke it down into land, water, air, and ecosystem services. So 4 categories. So the ecosystem services, we know what that is. That's the pollination, that's the photosynthesis, right? They're going to make up a value for that and put that on the balance sheet. But what the part that really shocked me was what they had included in the land portion of that. And I figured, okay, they're going to put a number on what's the value of all the federal land, that the federal government owns. That's where my brain was. But that's not what it said. In fact, it never gave a number for the value of the federal land. It only listed a value of the private land in America, which was $32 trillion. And they say very clearly that needed to be added to the balance sheet. So this is where
the land's already on there, right?
Right. I think that's exactly the reason. So that's where, when I first read that, that's where my mouth dropped. And I thought, okay, this is going obviously way too far. And I was talking about this before the election, and a gentleman in the front of the meeting, he just interrupted, and he said, "They can't do that. That's my private property." And I just looked at him and I said, "Sir, I don't think they were planning to ask you." And that's really, before the election, that's where we were. They had that strategy in place, and I think you would have seen, if we had had a Harris administration, that would be in play. That would already be, they would be fulfilling that agenda right now. So thankfully, day one, Trump got rid of that as well. But I like to remind people of that, because we are simply one administration away and a political party change away from that, again, being on the agenda. So I do like to, as much as I like to tell people we have made great progress this last year, and the administration has done a lot to roll back all of these agendas, the concern never goes away, because we haven't stopped them, we've slowed them down. And we just always have to keep that in mind. So that's why, really, when I think about, and really thinking about this particular conversation with you all, how do we protect our property? What are the things that Americans can do to get back to the strong property rights that we had in our beginning? And really, the answer dovetails right into what Catherine and you all already recommend, which is local protection. We have to get back to local durability, local communities. So we need to be growing our food local. We need to be buying our food and our products local. we need to be eating local. We need to get back to building the local community. And you all talk about it in terms of pay cash locally. So you keep the entire amount of that $100 bill circulating in that local community, not so that 3% is skimmed off to the credit card companies every time you make a purchase locally. It's simple things like that. Those are, when you think about property rights, that's really the best way for us to protect property rights, is to strengthen everything at the local level. So my first recommendation, of course, is to keep your property as unencumbered as you possibly can. And you went through all the different ways the property can be encumbered in the very beginning. One of those that we've already talked about as well is the conservation easement.
I think you're frozen.
There. Am I back?
You're back.
All right. So the conservation easement is one of those that erodes the property right. In fact, we even say that once you put a conservation easement on your land, you no longer functionally own that land. That's no longer private property because you no longer have control of it. The land trust does. And the conservation purpose now controls all the use in perpetuity. We have to remember that about conservation easements. That's in perpetuity. So it's not like a lease that has a start and end date. So you want to stay away from the conservation easements because that erodes your property, that erodes your liberty. The other thing that is really important to try and stay away from are those conservation programs that USDA manages, where they will, like the Conservation Reserve Program. It came into about, I think, the 1980s, and they started paying farmers not to put crops on their land and just let it go back natural, ostensibly to create habitat. It actually was for soil erosion, but then it turned into conservation for species and all these other different things. And so what had happened to those communities where landowners started getting paid not to produce from those lands is all the businesses started drying up. And so if you go through rural America and I know you guys have done this, you're driving through a little town and you see all these boarded up old, storefronts as you go through, and you're thinking, wow, this used to be a vibrant community. And you could tell that it wasn't that long ago. Well, that's what the Conservation Reserve Program did. But so there's all these conservation programs where the federal government pays the landowner money to do certain things. Some of them are to keep them out of production, and some of them just simply erode that property rights, because once you take the federal funding, you now have the federal nexus to your land, and other regulations can come into play. So we recommend people try to keep their property as pure and unencumbered as possible. From our perspective, the most valuable commodity in America today is private property that doesn't have any of these encumbrances.
Margaret,
because that's what's scarce.
Yeah, Margaret, can I just add something? And I don't know how much you've gotten into this at all, but there are people who are, like our subscribers, who purport to have a scheme to get something called an allodial title that purportedly keeps any kind of encumbrance from going onto your property. And they talk about there is such a thing as a title that comes from the government, from the original sovereign conveying the title for the first time to a private party. And presumably, I guess the government, at least whatever government owns the property, which would be a local one, might give up the right to tax that property. I've never heard of that being the case, but it, conceivably could happen in the case of conveying it for some particular purpose. But for the most part, the first time that the land is conveyed to a private party, that is a title that didn't have encumbrances on it, presumably. But after that, the local government and any kind of things that we've been talking about encumbering the property can encumber the property. So you can't go out and get a type of title that will keep any of these things from happening. Have you run across people who say there's such a thing as an allodial title that will prevent anyone from putting encumbrances on the land?
Yeah, we've heard that argument a lot, and I would just have to agree with you. We've never seen where the government has said that they can't do that, and whether a court has upheld that they can't do that. So I think a lot of these arguments, there's a lot of these types of arguments that are out there. The other one that you will hear is that the Constitution says the only thing that the federal government can own are forts, arsenals, and post offices, right? And but clearly we have 250 years worth of case law showing that the courts have said, well, actually they can own federal land, and actually states can own federal land. So I think that what I usually tell people is philosophically, you may have a good argument, and it may sound good, but the question is, how have the courts ruled on that? Because if we are a country of rule of law, then we respect the law that the courts have ruled on, and so how the courts have ruled on this is different from that particular philosophy.
Yeah.
So I would just agree with you. We haven't seen where that has been a durable protection.
Right. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting.
Oh, no problem. Well, so I think that's mainly the first point I really wanted to make is make sure you strengthen your property right. Try to keep any encumbrances off your property the best that you can to keep that property true and pure and defensible. The second thing that I really think you need to do is produce from your land. And this is something that we're seeing happen, particularly through like carbon credits and biodiversity credits. And I don't know if you guys have talked about these yet, but there is definitely a movement that is trying to conserve and tie up the land and gain control of the land. And one of the ways they do this is by reducing production off of the land. So let me give you kind of a scenario. These are not real numbers, but they're starting to sell carbon credits. And where they will go out to a landowner and tell them that, if we'll pay you $20 an acre for producing carbon off your land. And then, but if you do it our way and you graze your cattle our way, we will pay you $35 an acre. And now they are starting to do something which is called a biodiversity credit, which means that if you pull all your cattle off the land and you don't use it, and they measure it by how many wolves and deer and other species are on your land, they will pay you triple the top dollar, triple the $35 value to not produce anything from your land. And this is really kind of just the wrong path that we want to go in America, because when we stop producing from land, what a lot of people don't understand is agriculture doesn't start and stop quickly. So you can't just pull cattle off of land and then the next day decide, oh, I'm going to put a new bunch out here and it's going to go back to just what it was. You have to get your land in condition. You have to, your cattle have to get acclimated to the area. Like on our property, the cattle, after we lost the case, there's no cattle out there. And that property was 80 miles from end to end, and very few water sources. And so you had to have native cattle in there that understood where the water sources were, so they wouldn't get lost and they wouldn't die. And that's true with really any type of agriculture operation. And so this trend of this push to reduce production of cattle and other agriculture products by paying for carbon credits and biodiversity credits is the wrong direction. And that's what we're seeing being pushed in the private market. But what they have...
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say what they've successfully done through exactly the picture that Lou just showed there is the conservation agenda has been working to get control of the land. The way they do that is they make it unprofitable for you to use your land. And that's where we've seen all of these different inputs coming in that have really made it very difficult for landowners to make a living. Once they get you in that situation, then they come with the government program or a carbon credit or a biodiversity credit. And so you're kind of forced into a situation where we either sell the property or we take this deal. And that's really the position right now that they have a lot of landowners in. So we need to be aware of that.
Yes, and bringing it into the cities, because a lot of what you're talking about is the rural land and the land in in the more eastern part of the country, some people refer to as the square states, not all of which are square, because certainly Oklahoma and Texas are not square. But we've got the issue of cell towers, which impede the value of your land, and that seems to me similar to the payment for not putting your land into production. That is interfering with your right to possess, whatever portion of your land is the cell tower is on. But there are governmental regulations, I understand, I think in Tennessee, but at least in some places, the government can facilitate a private owner of a cell tower to put the cell tower on your front lawn. And you don't have any right to exclude that. And that's one of the reasons that we've been real proponents of opposing some of the proposed Telecommunications Act amendments that take away the local control over the use of land. And of course, remember that your right to your individual property is something that is really valuable, but that is affected by what your neighbors do with their property too. I mean, Catherine turned down the offer of a cell tower on her property in Tennessee, and one of her neighbors then entered into the same very lucrative contract with the cell tower owner to put the cell tower like next door or a couple doors down, which basically affected her health-wise and even in terms of what the property looks like, as much as if it had been put on her land. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I live in a township, and the township enacted soon after I moved here what I call the Make Columbia Township Beautiful Act. It has to do with things that are supposed to improve the value of your property, but they do things like limit having chickens on your property, and there are some areas where you're not allowed to grow crops on property that's within a jurisdiction that you and I would consider to be city or urban property. And that's why a lot of people move out to areas that don't have as much government involvement, have very slimmed down governance systems, and do not have these limitations on how you can use your property. And that, we call that out in the county, out there, and more people are moving into areas where they can homestead and have more rights. But those are similar things to what's happening out west that impinge on the right to grow have large farms and ranches and have cattle.
Yeah, and those are really good points, and that actually kind of leads into the other key point I wanted to make on things that you can do, and that's you have to stay engaged, monitor and stay engaged in what your local, state, and federal regulatory bodies are doing.
Yes,
So
absolutely, and
yeah,
the governing areas, your county or your
yeah.
city.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, at the local level, there are soil and water conservation districts that have some input. There's water districts, even fire districts. Of course, your county commission. It's really important that you stay engaged on what the county commissions are doing. Your counties have a lot of jurisdiction, so they can deal with all of these planning issues. And you have to stay on top of what they're doing. And this is where I think it's really, whether you're an elected official or not, it's really important to develop those local relationships, to know your commissioners, to stay on top of what they're discussing and become a resource to them. We just did our Land and Liberty conference last month, which Carolyn, of course, was there and spoke, and she was marvelous. Sorry, Catherine. I'm sorry. Yeah, and she was great. But this is a lot of what we try to train people to do is to be effective as a local leader. There's certain ways that you go about this. And, we're not the group that organizes a protest in front of the county commissioners. We're the group that helps people sit down with their county commissioners and make those good, strong, intelligent arguments as to why certain things would be damaging and harmful to the community, so that they become a resource, somebody that the county commissioners call when these kind of issues come to are on their plate. So, work to be that kind of a person in your community where your county commissioners, your elected leaders, you're helping them, you're supporting them, you're advising them, you're guiding them. And then to stay continually aware of what is on their plate and actions that they are looking to put into place, like cell tower regulations, or just different ordinances or things like that. But you actually need to do that not just at the local level, but the state level as well, and which is what I know you all focus a lot on. We saw 2 action alerts in Tennessee alone this morning. And then there's the federal level as well. You have to keep an eye on all of those, but it's absolutely key that you stay engaged on what's happening at the local level.
Yes,
that's
and
where we
you
have to strengthen everything.
You have more power at the local level. I've heard stories about how city commissioners or city council or local governing people were greatly affected by 2 or 3 people coming to the meetings.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my
Yeah.
God, we had 3 people who came to the meeting about this. We really need to pay attention to it.
Yeah. You want to make sure your people, that believe like you are the people who are sitting in those seats. So you help them get elected. But when they're there, you don't just walk away and say, hey, do a great job. You have to stay engaged and continue to help them so that they can be successful, because it's a huge job.
Right.
I have a quick question, Margaret. What about people who, like us, who have gifted land and it's in a 501c3, and we're not allowed to say the condition for it being gifted to us, it's not allowed to be sold for 70 years plus, blah, blah, blah. How safe is that? Housing adults with autism. Do we have issues because it's a 501c3? It's not actually our land?
Say that again, your specific question. I'm not sure I understand.
Well, so people who have land under a 501c3, a charity, is that a very precarious situation to be in?
Well, so it's the board who's going to make decisions on that land. So instead of you as an individual property owner, now it's the board that owns the 501c3 board that owns that is going to make the decisions on that land, and that'll be done by a quorum under the bylaws of that organization.
Right, and under the tax laws that allow the nonprofit status, which allows you to take donations that are tax deductible, there are some requirements, for example, of having a board that's not controlled by the original owners of the property. So you can actually get board members who are sympathetic to your to what your mission is, and so in some sense, in fact, as opposed to de jure in law, you have control, but you don't have the legal control because you are not don't have a majority interest in the voting by the board. But there also, I was just doing some research on, because we're interested in starting possibly a nonprofit for educational purposes, and there are some things they can do through the courts, through the tax, the IRS, that can look at what you're doing. And if, for example, in the educational context, you can't have too much conspiracy stuff and retain your tax exempt status. So there are there are some things that are worth looking into as conditions to the tax, the nonprofit status in terms of how you govern, and there are reasons for you to state things in one way versus another so that it is more acceptable to the IRS. So there are some limits, and this is just an example of how you might not know that your value of your property or your ability to control as you think that you have it might be compromised by, for example, tax regulations.
But well, Margaret, how can people follow you and keep updated with everything that you're doing?
Yeah, go to our website, americanstewards.us, and then we have a newsletter. Just sign up for that. That is free, and we produce that every week, and it'll kind of keep you involved in some of the issues that we're keeping our eye on and the fights that we're getting in.
Well, I want to thank you so much for the really extraordinarily important work that you're doing. And we really appreciate you educating us as well. Any last comments, Carolyn or Margaret?
No. Thank you so much, Margaret, for helping us. And I hope our viewers understand that, these are not issues that are not relevant to you because your primary focus is on vaccines or, the more obvious effects on children's health. These are things that affect the next generation and our children. So we really appreciate people who come on and educate us on related issues.
Thank you. It's been a
Margaret.
pleasure.
It's been wonderful. All right, everybody. Well, we're going to go to our story of the day now.
And we'll be with Renette again next week, talking about the things she usually talks about.
Fabulous. Okay, bye, everybody.
I'm Danielle Kropp.
And this is a Johnson & Johnson injury.
Correct.
First of all, tell everybody what you do, please.
I am the former Chief Data Officer of American Express and Albertsons Companies.
Ooh, what do you have to tell us? Well, we'll do the injury first and then we'll
Okay.
get into that.
Okay. So
Yeah, why did you take the Johnson & Johnson?
I was coerced into taking it by my employer. I was 3 months into a new job, and they were pushing very hard. And for my career, I need to travel to be able to be in places to do my job as a leader. And so they were saying I wouldn't be able to travel for my work, which would have hampered my career significantly. So I already knew all of the data on the vaccines because I'm a trained biostatistician.
What did you know about the data?
So I had read all of the trials, the clinical trials that were out. So I chose the one that I thought would be that is the least novel, and from the data that was available at the time probably had the least side effects, which was the J&J.
But you still knew.
I knew.
You really had informed consent and you still went for it.
I didn't have a choice. So I basically felt like my husband was going through the process of getting a religious exemption with his employer, and so I felt like I needed to take one for the team in case he was not able to keep his job. So I went to get it, and as I was getting my shot, I got my shot, and 2 minutes later, a lady sat down next to me and got her shot. When she got her shot, she went into immediate convulsions.
Really? Right down there?
Yes. The people
And
at
she
the...
was just before you?
She was just after me.
Just after
If she had been before me, there's no way I would have taken
Right.
it. And she just after it, and the EMTs were called in, and the people in the pharmacy looked like they had seen this before, and they were very scared. And so it was a very...
How
she
old
got...
was she?
She was pretty much the same age as me, probably in early to late 40s. And so she was clearly in great distress. She got taken to the hospital. And so that was definitely, I felt like it was it turned out well for me because I was able to go back to my employer and say, I'm never doing this again, and here's why. So that was it was, it was just a terrible experience, but in some ways I never from that experience I got to get a exemption for my employer to never have to take one again. And then from there I started getting chronic migraines. Like every week I had a migraine for like 4 to 6 months.
So, like a throbbing headache, you had to darken the room, type of
like full on migraine. Like had to usually they would last about 24 to 48 hours, and I would have to just be in a room, dark, wouldn't be able to eat, was barely able to sleep, and just wait for them to pass. And they just kept getting worse and worse. About 4 months later, I actually got COVID, and started taking ivermectin on the advice of a chiropractor. And after that, I stopped having the migraines.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So now, today, how do you feel?
Since then, I've had chronic stomach issues. And I've also had bouts with depression.
Depression.
Yeah.
We hear that with Johnson & Johnson. Weirdly enough, we're hearing depression, a lot of that, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
And then just kind of foggy brain, I would say, as well. Like I'm not as sharp as I feel like I was before.
Are you still able to work?
I am, but I had I was laid off last year, and I think that the fact that I'd been sick really consistently was a factor in my layoff.
So you no longer work there?
No.
So tell us everything.
Tell us everything about
For us.
about the employer situation.
Yes.
So fortunately,
Data, stuff like that.
the data.
Everything
Okay.
what people need to hear.
After getting vaccinated, I fortunately had a leader at Albertsons who was very understanding and listened to the story. And she had her own vaccine injury, which was that she kept, every time she got vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine, she got her period again, which she'd been in menopause for 5 years.
And she kept going back for more vaccines.
It was very strange. I asked her why, and she said, like, I will take whatever that I need to take to be able to continue to like travel and do what I need to do.
Dear God.
Yeah, strange. But she was very open to like the fact that, and she went to the HR and basically said like she's not taking any more vaccines, and you're going to allow her to do whatever she needs to do after my story. So that was very helpful. But yeah, the company was very much continuing to push the vaccines, even when there were situations where pharmacists in the stores were actually quitting. Like they were like, there's a video actually out there that went viral during COVID of an Albertsons pharmacist getting on the loudspeaker and saying, I am not giving, have you seen this one? I am not giving a single one more of these things. They are poison. People are getting harmed. And she's just like on the loudspeaker in the grocery store in Cortez, Colorado.
Good for her.
And she quit and walked out the door. So yeah, it was a very challenging time, I think, for everybody. Like we just were being told things that simply were not true.
Have you, since all of this, been able to go back and look at the whole of the vaccine schedule?
Yeah, and actually I had some knowledge of all of that before COVID. So it's like I already knew that vaccines had issues before COVID, because my daughter is vaccine injured herself. So she has, fortunately she's fine, but on her second MMR, she went catatonic for 24 hours. And I'd already had some information, being a data person, reading things that like there was some, but I waited until she was after 3 to vaccinate her with anything. I only vaccinated her with vaccines that were available for my schedule in the 1980s. But still, she hasn't had a single vaccine since she had that reaction to the MMR. Her pediatrician even agreed with me. She was like, she should never have another vaccine.
Good.
But I've had all sorts of issues with like getting her, exemptions, right, for the school, etc.
Now, is there anything else you want to say to the people? I feel like the moral of the story, and do correct me if you feel like this is rude or not appropriate, is that you kind of settled and took the Johnson & Johnson because you thought it was the better of.
Yes.
But it still injured you.
It still injured me.
So what are we going to say? How do we summarize this? What's your warning to the people?
My warning to the people would be, and I think throughout COVID, it's like I think I should have stood up stronger. Right? I think I should have not just done what I felt was necessary in the situation. I started off at the very beginning being against lockdowns because I knew the epidemiology, because I'm a biostatistician. So I knew that that was the wrong thing to do. And I stood up really hard at the beginning and actually circulated a petition to keep schools open. And I was told by many mothers in the group that I sent this to that I was going to be responsible for people dying. And so it made me quiet down and not like just kind of go like and go along more. And I wish if I could go back in time, I would have been louder. I would have been more like, nope, you are wrong. This is not okay. I wouldn't have cared so much what they thought. Right? So I think that that's my takeaway from this entire experience. I think it's made me more outspoken about all sorts of things now than ever, and less likely to be coerced into anything.
Wonderful. Anything else you'd like to say?
No. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
And just for anybody wondering, we can't tell people what to wear. Remember that. It's up to them what they wear when they sit on our sofa. Yes, it is.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.